2 hours later, Karen sat in a sterile interrogation room, still wearing her tiara but minus the birthday cake, which had been confiscated as potential evidence. FBI agent Rebecca Torres sat across from her, struggling to maintain professional composure while reviewing the most bizarre incident report of her 15-year career. Mrs. Whitmore, Agent Torres began, "You do understand that breaking into the White House is a federal crime, regardless of your civic motivations." Karen crossed her arms defiantly. "I prefer unauthorized inspection. And before you continue with this harassment, I want to speak to your supervisor about the appalling lack of security protocols I observed. Do you realize there are at least 6 landscaping violations visible from the south lawn alone? The landscaping violations. The rose bushes are clearly planted outside regulation spacing guidelines. And don't get me started on the fountain maintenance issues." Karen pulled out her phone and began scrolling through photos she'd somehow managed to take during her infiltration. "I documented everything. Someone needs to hold this administration accountable for basic property upkeep." Agent Torres rubbed her temples. In her career, she'd interrogated terrorists, con artists, and international criminals, but none of them had questioned her agency's hedge-trimming standards. "Mrs. Whitmore, help me understand something. You broke federal law to complain about your neighbor's gardening. It's not gardening, it's community standards." Karen's voice rose to the pitch that had made countless contractors flee her neighborhood. "When Mrs. Patterson installed that unauthorized garden gnome, did anyone care? No. When the Johnsons painted their shutters navy blue instead of the approved colonial blue, did anyone enforce the covenant? Of course not. And now look where we are. Complete societal breakdown." The door opened, and Agent Torres' supervisor, Deputy Director William Hayes, entered with the grim expression of a man who'd been pulled from his bed to deal with suburban terrorism. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, settling into a chair, "we've reviewed your file. You've filed over 400 complaints with various city departments in the past year alone. You've sued 3 neighbors, gotten 17 service workers fired, and somehow managed to get yourself banned from 2 different Home Depots." Karen lifted her chin proudly. "Maintaining standards requires vigilance." "You also," Deputy Director Hayes continued, consulting his notes, "attempted to citizens arrest a mail carrier for parking 6 inches outside the designated zone, called the fire department 14 times about suspicious barbecue smoke, and tried to have your next-door neighbor's dog registered as a noise ordinance violation. Princess Fluffington barks at precisely 6:43 am every morning. That's a clear pattern of intentional disturbance." Agent Torres stared at her colleague, who seemed to be fighting back either laughter or a nervous breakdown. "The question is," Deputy Director Hayes said slowly, "what do we do with you? You've committed multiple federal crimes, but you're clearly not a terrorist threat. You're just a concerned citizen," Karen finished firmly. "And I demand to speak with someone who understands the importance of maintaining property values. This country was built on respect for rules and regulations." Deputy Director Hayes leaned back in his chair, suddenly looking much older than his 58 years. In all his time in federal law enforcement, he'd never encountered someone who treated breaking into the White House like filing a complaint with the City Planning Commission. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said finally, "I'm going to make you an offer." Karen straightened in her chair, recognizing the tone of someone ready to negotiate. After 30 years of HOA politics, she knew when she had leverage. "We've been watching your methods," Deputy Director Hayes continued, pulling out a thick folder. "Your success rate in compliance enforcement is actually remarkable. 97% of your citations result in corrective action within 30 days. 98.3%, Karen corrected. "The Hendersons are still pending, but I have strategies in place." Agent Torres looked between them, wondering if she'd stumbled into some sort of fever dream. "Sir, are you seriously considering? The Department of Homeland Security has been looking for innovative approaches to community-level security assessment," Hayes interrupted. "Someone with your particular skills might be valuable in identifying potential issues before they become federal problems." Karen's eyes narrowed with interest. "Are you offering me a job? A consulting position?" neighborhood-level intelligence gathering. You'd have official credentials, government backing, and the authority to investigate properties across multiple jurisdictions. For the first time since her arrest, Karen smiled, an expression that had struck fear into the hearts of lawn care professionals across 3 counties. "I'd need my own office, a company car, and full access to property records," she said immediately. "Also, my title needs to reflect the scope of my authority. Senior Compliance Enforcement Specialist has a nice ring to it." "Done," Hayes said, pulling out official paperwork that had been prepared with surprising speed. "Your first assignment would be investigating some concerning patterns we've identified in suburban developments nationwide. Unauthorized modifications, suspicious gathering patterns, potential code violations that might indicate larger security issues." Agent Torres watched in horror as her supervisor essentially weaponized the most feared HO president in America. "There's just one condition," Hayes added. "You complete anger management counseling, and you work with a partner who can moderate your approach." Karen considered this. As long as they understand that compromise is what got us into this mess in the first place. 3 weeks later, Karen stood in her new government office, reviewing surveillance photos of a suspicious neighborhood in Ohio, where 17 homes had installed identical unauthorized deck extensions. Her partner, Agent Sarah Kim, watched nervously as Karen annotated the photos with increasing excitement. "These aren't random violations," Karen announced, her voice carrying the same intensity she'd once reserved for mailbox height infractions. "This is organized, coordinated. Someone is running an operation that completely disregards municipal building codes, and I'm going to find out who." Agent Kim, who'd previously worked organized crime, realized she might actually miss dealing with regular criminals. "Ma'am, shouldn't we consider that maybe they just all hired the same contractor?" Karen turned to her with the look of someone who'd just been asked if the sky was purple. "Agent Kim, in my 28 years of community oversight, I've learned one fundamental truth. There's no such thing as coincidental compliance violations. Someone is testing our systems, seeing how far they can push before anyone notices." She pinned the photos to her investigation board with the precision of a general planning a military campaign. "And now they've made it federal business." As Karen began dialing the first of what would undoubtedly be dozens of calls to various municipal offices, Agent Kim wondered if the Department of Homeland Security had just solved their suburban surveillance problem or accidentally created something far more terrifying. Outside her window, a landscaping truck parked 3 inches outside the designated zone, and Karen's head snapped up like a predator sensing prey. The transformation was complete, but the question remained: had they unleashed America's most effective compliance enforcer, or had they just given the country's most dangerous HOA president the keys to federal authority? Only the unauthorized deck extensions in Ohio would tell. Karen Whitmore stood in the middle of the Oval Office at 3:47 a.m., wearing a rhinestone tiara and holding a store-bought birthday cake with 53 flickering candles. Secret Service agents surrounded her, their weapons drawn, their faces a mixture of bewilderment and barely controlled panic. "Ma'am, put down the cake and step away from the president's desk," Agent Martinez commanded, his voice steady despite the surreal circumstances. Karen adjusted her tiara with her free hand, completely unfazed. "Excuse me, but I have every right to be here. I pay taxes, which means I technically own this place. And since it's my birthday, I'm exercising my constitutional right to celebrate wherever I damn well please." That's not how property taxes work," Agent Chen whispered to her partner. 6 hours earlier, Karen had been pacing her pristine Maple Grove subdivision home, fuming over her neighbor's latest transgression. The Hendersons had planted petunias that were clearly 3 inches over the HOA-approved height limit. As president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, she'd issued 17 citations in the past month alone, but these people simply refused to comply with basic community standards. "If people can just ignore rules whenever they feel like it," she'd muttered while drafting her 23rd strongly worded letter of the week, "then what's the point of having order in society?" That's when the idea struck her. If her own neighbors wouldn't respect authority, maybe it was time to appeal to the highest authority in the land. The president needed to understand how neighborhood lawlessness was destroying America, one overgrown hedge at a time. But when Karen arrived at the White House gates at midnight, the guards had the audacity to tell her she needed an appointment. An appointment. As if the leader of the free world was too busy to discuss the Peterson family's unauthorized bird feeder placement. "Do you know who I am?" she demanded, brandishing her laminated HOA badge like a shield. "I maintain property values for over 300 families. I've prevented 17 unauthorized fence installations this year alone." The guards, clearly untrained in recognizing true civic leadership, had turned her away. But Karen Whitmore didn't become the most feared HOA president in 3 counties by accepting no as an answer. She'd simply walked around the perimeter until she found the service entrance where catering trucks delivered supplies. Her late husband's old maintenance uniform, discovered in the back of her closet, had been the perfect disguise. Now, surrounded by increasingly agitated federal agents, Karen felt a familiar surge of righteous indignation. These people clearly didn't understand the gravity of suburban disorder. "I need to speak with the president immediately," she announced, setting the cake down on the historic Resolute desk. "We have a national emergency on our hands, and it involves at least 14 violations of basic aesthetic standards." Agent Martinez slowly lowered his weapon, realizing they were dealing with something far more dangerous than a typical intruder, a suburban woman with a clipboard and an unshakable belief in her own authority.